React DOM, we have learned about component declaration and instantiation and have already seen it in action for the list and search component. So declaring and instantiating is basically declaring, kind of like declaring a function and then using this closing tag, HTML closing tag, to be able to use that within JSX. So it's still in the context of JSX, which still in React. However, the very beginning, we started with the declaration of the app component, yet never came across its instantiation. So with the app component that we discussed earlier, we never see it being inside the JSX. Now why is that? We will discuss it here. It must be there, otherwise the component and all of its descendants component in the component hierarchy would not render. Now open the src/main.jsx file to see app components instantiation with the app element. So here we have in main.jsx file, so this is what we were saying that allows React to be a single page application. This main.jsx file are the one that launch the app element. So the file may differ a bit from your file, however the following snippet show all the essential aspects of it. There are two libraries imported at the beginning of the file, React and React DOM. While React is used for the day-to-day business of a React developer, React DOM is usually used once in a React application to hook React into the native HTML world. So this is the starting point that will allow React to hook it into an HTML element world that will then the parent container of all the React components. Now open the index.html file on the side and spot the HTML element where the ID attribute equals root. That's exactly the element where that's exactly the element where React insert itself into the HTML to bootstrap the entire React application, starting with the app component. Let's open that file, just a moment. So this is the file or the index.html with an ID root that allow us to bootstrap this main.jsx. In the JavaScript file, the createRoot method expects the HTML element that is used to instantiate React. There we are using JavaScript's built-in getElementById method to return the HTML element that we have seen in the index.html file. Once we have the root object, we can call render function on the returned root object with JSX parameter, which usually represents the entry point component, also called root component. Normally, the entry point component is the instance of the app component, but it can be other JSX too. So here, this create root basically expects this index HTML or have this index HTML as parameter. There we are using the JavaScript built-in getElementById method to return the HTML element that we have seen in the index.html file. So we're using this getElementById root to return this. So this will gonna return the first HTML on our React app. So once we have the root object, which is this, the root or the parent container, we can call render function on the returned root object with JSX parameter. Which usually represents the entry point component, also called root component. So once we have that root object, we can now call render to return the root object with the JSX parameter, which is in this case an HTML hello title. So that title will now contact our app component, our string React, which will show hello React as parameter, which usually represents the entry point component, also called root component. Normally, the entry point component is the instance of the app component, but it can be any other JSX too. So here, what we did is we render the instance of app component, which is just an HTML or JSX as well. So here's an example of rendering a non-component, which in this case is just a string hello React. Essentially, React DOM is everything that's needed to integrate React into any website which uses HTML. If you start a React application from scratch, there's usually only one React DOM that create root function call in your application. However, if you happen to work on a legacy application that used something else than React before, you may see multiple React DOM that create root calls because only certain areas of the application are powered by React. So if you're using React purely, there is only one React DOM that create root, which is this create root document.getElement. But for older stocks, you might see multiple of this because only part of the application are powered by React. So anyway, do you recall the introduction of the rise of single page applications that are powered by only a small HTML file and a large JavaScript file? You can see how everything fits together now. Well, one small HTML file, here index.html, and one large JavaScript file, here compiled and banded src/main.jsx and src/app.jsx files are transferred from web server to the browser. The JavaScript files are mostly responsible to render all the HTML in the browser. So here, what we haven't mentioned is that the main.jsx, which is this, and the app.jsx are being compiled, and then along with the small HTML file. So these three files are the one getting from converted from a JSX into a create React element, and that element will become heap in the JavaScript object, and then we'll go to the virtual diving algorithm, and then are transferred from web server to browser. The JavaScript files are mostly responsible to render all HTML in the browser. So the JavaScript file will then now be responsible again with contacting the Node DOM API using React under hood commands uh, without a large HTML file. Now the HTML file is only there to request the JavaScript file and to render the HTML element where React inserts itself. So the HTML file is not, is only there to bootstrap, because React JSX is not really it is not really working as an HTML. It's purely JavaScript. So basically that first or one index HTML is just there for it to be converted to JavaScript, and that JavaScript object will now contact the node. So from there, React calls all of its needed function components to render itself as component hierarchy. So from there, it will create those heaps, right? And then it will now convert that to a JavaScript calls to a DOM API, and then it will convert that to a component hierarchy tree, which provide parent and child function components. So that chapter, or this chapter, is basically explaining how React crosses the boundary from JavaScript world into the browser DOM world. And your confusion is the right one. I see create root, that render, app, but what is actually happening from file, load to real screen? Let's walk it through as one connected story. First, the two worlds. There are really two different systems involved. First, JavaScript world. This is where your app function lives. JSX gets turned into JS objects. React runs. VH manages stock plus heap. Letter B, browser DOM world. So we discussed this a lot before. So this is where the React runs in itself first without contacting DOM API. So it includes diving algorithm, converting heap to a JavaScript DOM API. So it's not executed yet or not contacting DOM API, but it's readying the stock to contact that. Browser DOM world, this is where document, get element by ID, create element, actual div, input h1, focus, click, rendered pixels, leave. Second, what React DOM actually means. The chapter says React DOM is used to hook React into the native HTML world. That is almost the perfect sentence. Because React equal knows how to work with components, props, state, elements, while React DOM knows how to take the React stop and apply it to the browser DOM. So the React DOM, think about this as an API where we tap to contact the DOM API, and the React are the one that provides us the features for props, states, elements, hooks, etc. So React equals to UI description system. React DOM is equal browser adapter. That's the cleanest mental model. So start from index.html. Usually you have something like exclamation doc type HTML, then HTML, then body, then parent or root div, id root, closing div, then script, type is equals to module, then src equals to /src /main.jsx, then closing script, then body, then HTML. This is tiny on purpose. The browser parses this HTML first and creates DOM nodes like document HTML body div root. So this is what's happening under the hood. This index HTML, when sent to a browser, are being rendered like this. It has a HTML body and a parent div like this, a document HTML body div root, just like with the older parsing of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So at this moment, React has not rendered your app yet. Only the empty container exists. So the page has a mount point, div id equal to root, and then closing div. So that's the whole React will feel for then browser loads your JavaScript bundle. The script tag loads main.jsx, actually the transpiled /bundle version. So as we can see, there is actually a script tag. So we still need to comply with the script tag enabled by HTML, but only for the first load. Right? After that first load, React will take over, and then it will just use a JavaScript object to contact that DOM API. So your source code here, we render the app and then strict mode as parent. Now we trace this line by line. Document that get element by ID, parameter string root. This is not React. This is the browser's DOM API. It means browser, give me the real DOM node whose ID is root. So basically, this bundled JavaScript are asking now the browser, what is the root node of the give me the real DOM node whose ID is root, that we just help you bootstrap at the first render to the browser. So this will now return a DOM object, something like HTML div element. So this is the actual empty div id equals to root, then closing div, created earlier from index.html. So now JavaScript has a reference to real DOM node. This matters a lot because at least now JavaScript knows how to or where to start manipulating the node in the browser to project your desired output. Create root dot dot dot. So create root document that get element by id root. This does React DOM. Use this DOM node as the container for the React app. So this create root, it's not like a mystery function. It's just saying you need to since we already have the node, we need to contain this root node. So use this DOM node as the container for the React app. So this DOM node now will be our parent container where our React app will be inserted into. So React DOM creates an internal root object. So now this is where you get the diffing algorithm, or this is how React now detect the changes of the node, because internally, though that is the real DOM, React still create its internal root object. Now the root object is basically React's manager for this subtree. So conceptually, root equal React controller for everything inside div id equals root. So now root DOM knows where to render. So now the React DOM, which is responsible for diffing algorithm, knows where to render into the actual DOM because we have reference using our bootstrap first index.html that still has the script tags, and then where future updates should go, whether some of the parts should update, and then which DOM subtree it owns. That render app component, this is the important bridge. You pass JSX app, but JSX is not HTML and it's not yet DOM. it gets transpiled or bundled into something like React.createElement app comma null. So these are the React element we have been discussing before. That creates a React element object like $$ type of colon symbol parameter React dot element comma parameter or member type with a value up, and then comma member props with a value and the object, and then closing object. So this is just a JS object in memory. So it's still inside React running in the engine. So this is where the running V8 engine we are discussing. So at this stage, app rendering app inside this main.jsx means React. Here's the root element description of my UI. So we are telling now with this app is actually the description or how you would change the node of your front end. It's still in the heap because later when we update that, the React DOM will allow us to just update what we want. So means not yet screen, not yet DOM, still just description, still just an object in memory, not yet reflected in the DOM API. Then React executes app. So suppose app.jsx const title equals string React semicolon, then function app empty parameter inside is return open semicolon bracket, then parent div, and then child element h1 label and input. So for h1 we have hello string interpolation title with a label. We have HTML4 attribute equal the value search, then a string search, and then in input we have an ID attribute equals to search string, and then type attribute equals to text. Now React says type app. Since app is a function component, React calls it. So in the So since these are being converted to something like this, type up and then props, and then when React sees this, type up, since app is a function component, the way React treat that function component is that React calls it. So on the JS call stack, we have render function and then app empty parameter. So it is pushed into the stock of that V8 engine. Now inside app, it reads title from memory, evaluates the title string interpolation. So this is now where you do the heap. So this is being put into and then builds React elements for div h1 label input. So this is what's happening under hood. So inside the app, it reads title from memory. So it's still initializing the memory. Think about this kind of like with Node or ESM modules working in your Node.js runtime. So in Node.js runtime, you basically have or declare all the possible dots first, and then you connect those dots, and only you traverse to the needed path. So that's actually what is being done here. You have the call stack, and then you read title from memory, and then evaluates title, builds React elements for div h1 label and input. What JSX becomes inside app, so this parent div h1 child element label and input becomes roughly React.create element, and then first parameter div string comma null comma React.create element, and then with the first argument h1 string comma null comma hello string comma title, and then comma React create element parameter string comma, and then object HTML4 with the value search comma search string, and then React.create element first argument input string comma object with the member ID with the value search comma member type with the value text. So let's go back here. So this suppose like this we started with the stock, it builds this div h1 label input, So this is actually how you build this. So we're now building in the heap, right? We're converting that JSX, so a JavaScript with HTML, to a React.create element with this under the hood. So each of those is just a plain JavaScript object which will turn into a heap, and then later it will turn to a call to a DOM API. So example type, an object with a member type with a value string input, a member props with a value, an object with a member ID with a value search with a member type with a value text. Still, no real DOM node yet. So again, it's like with the node.js module. We first have to check the available dots, initialize the values in the dots, then only traverse those dots. So React elements is not equal DOM node. A React element is just a description object. So it's just a the description of the object. So it's like a stock, and then it will be converted to an object later, and that object will now be converted to a DOM API. So stock use while functions are being called, like render empty parameter and then up empty parameter. Heap stores data object like strings React, comma hello React. So the strings, you might think it's in the stock because we keep mentioning that for primitive types that's usually in the stock, but in this case, since inside the closure of a function, it will be put into a heap. And then React element objects is still in the heap, then props objects is in heap. So when React builds member type with a value input, comma member props with the value object, member ID with the value string, that object lives in heap, not in the DOM, not on screen, just memory. Then React DOM translate React elements into DOM operations. So this is now where the React DOM translate it. And then the React DOM again are the one responsible for checking the only updates or the real update that happened. So it caches those things or those states that already loaded. So this is the exact part you've been hunting for. Like React DOM looks at type input, comma props with an object member ID, value search, comma member type, value text. So these are the type or the converted heap, and says I need to create a real browser input element. So internally, does the moral equivalent of const node equal document that create element parameter input string semicolon, the next line node.id equals parameter search semicolon, the next line node.type equal parameter text string semicolon. For the label, it will create const label equal document that create element parameter label semicolon, the next line label.html4 equals search string, the next line label.text content equal search string, and then etc. So let's just go back. So as you can see, this is the actual connection, or this is the actual call to DOM API. So it's the call hasn't been created, or it doesn't create or doesn't call the DOM node until the values are initialized or until the heap is created.